Organic farming, can it feed the nation? Can it feed the world? Yes, say a number of studies, including a recent one done at the University of Michigan, which found that the yields from organic and conventional farms are the same. Meanwhile, organic farming has been growing as people prefer food grown in a friendlier way. We're at the Garden of Eve farm in Riverhead, New York. And here we have Chris. Now, Chris, you come from a farming family. Your folks raised you on a farm upstate, but it was a conventional farm. I mean, here we're on an organic farm. From your perspective in agriculture since you were a kid, how feasible is this? I mean, a lot of conventional, traditional farmers would say, no, organic farming, it really doesn't make sense. It's not practical.
Yeah, I think obviously it makes sense for us. And growing up on a farm, I think my parents were a little different. They were conventional, but they were looking for alternative ways to produce milk. They didn't quite get into the boom that is now the organic milk market, which is becoming profitable for small farms, but they were kind of heading in that way basically because of their reading and just kind of, I guess, quality-wise, they were tasting the milk, and they found that by having the cows on pasture for the majority of the year and giving them, more grasses to eat, that the milk butter fat was higher and that they were getting a, better tasting product. But production-wise, they were losing out, so they never really quite, got to, take advantage of the market, which is now high-quality organic milk. But they had moved away from using any sort of chemicals on the land to grow, the hay crops and so forth. But my interest, I think, I think as a person that's always looking to, learn more. People ask us, why didn't you go into conventional farming? And we first of all were scared, because we both were environmental activists, and I worked on water quality issues and saw water reports where chemicals, very high concentrations of chemicals in the Great Lakes and the Finger Lakes and groundwater on Long Island, and knew that they were coming from, not only homeowners but from farms, nitrogen loading from, animal operations and farms in general. So, we started to look at, if we are going to do this, that we're going to do it and learn how to do it organically. And, we did talk to a lot of farmers who were growing beautiful crops and having success, so we kind of just slowly learned from there. Yeah.
Eve, why do you consider organic agriculture important?
Well, I think, and going back to your last question, I think as far as, we're at a time in history where fewer people have anything to do with farms and, growing food than ever before, possibly in the history of mankind. So, as far as, just to go back to your last question also, as far as having been from Harvard, it's sad that we're at a point where, farming, which used to be the only occupation basically, is now, in a lot of ways, like, can be sometimes considered, like a low status thing, like, oh, they're just farmers. There's so much to it. And now we're having this resurgence where people are fascinated by farming. They want the farm experience. They want to get back in touch with the farm and where their food grows and know a lot about how it's being grown and how it affects them, what's going on, the crops. And, almost like another back to the land movement, except, so people want to know their farmer, know where their food comes from. And that's really exciting to be part of that, where farming all of a sudden is, it's just seeing a real resurgence of young people who are getting into farming for the first time and, making it a job that you can go into just like any other job that you could go into, after college. Organic, it's really a no-brainer for us.
How did farmers in this country, and in fact increasingly around the world, get hooked on what's been called chemical farming, conventional farming?
Well, it's still happening now. We actually were just asked to speak on a bioengineering panel, and farmers are always looking for, how can I make more money? It's not a very profitable business, and you work hard, so you look at, ways that you can cut down on labor or cut down on costs. And if, you have somebody that comes out and say, look at that cabbage you grew, how about growing it in half the time and twice as big? The farmer says, sure, So the one thing that farmers aren't, and my father used to always say this, aren't, too good about is they're not too good about organizing. And they allow themselves to kind of be thrown at the whims of the market, and they'll overproduce, to the point where they almost get bankrupt. And then they'll say, geez, we shouldn't have done that. The same thing happened with milk. And then next time the price of milk starts going up, farmers are buying, 100 cows and then, not thinking about, well, this is going to cause another surplus, and then the price is going to crash down again. So I think, farmers, selling conventional wholesale vegetables were looking to just sell as much as they possibly could, and that's, not our goal. Our goal is to sell it for the price that we can grow it the way that we, feel is the healthiest, way to grow it, and to get it to somebody for a price that is, fair for the farmer and the environment.
Now, Eve, you've been able to, speaking of selling, get a pretty big market for the products from this Garden of Eve.
Yeah, we have, well, this is Chris and I were just talking about yesterday. We say it's our 7th season, but really, counting 7, our first season was when we first had a garden. So it's really, I would say, about our 5th season of really at a commercial scale. And we started off with just a couple acres and just doing 2 or 3 farmers markets, and now we have 550 community-supported agriculture members who pick up, all over Long Island, Brooklyn, Manhattan, and we also have 2 farmers markets, and we have our farm stand. So it's really consumers who care about having this type of food available to them and their families, and about supporting farms like ours that make farms like ours possible, because we don't go through wholesalers, we don't sell at supermarkets, even progressive ones like Whole Foods or wherever. We sell directly to people who want our food. So I always tell people that they say vote with your dollars. This is one instance where I think people are really having probably the most powerful effect that they can on their own local neighborhood.
I bet that when this is a farm in Riverhead, I bet decades ago it was a potato farm. I'm just guessing, not it was monoculture. It wasn't the variety. I mean, talk about the variety of, I'm looking around, and what I remember, I as a kid used to go camping at Wildwood State Park, my family, just a few miles down the road, and you would pass through miles and miles of potato farms with some interruption with strawberry farms. But here you have an amazing variety of crop.
Yeah. I think Chris is cutting a cabbage.
There you go.
There we go. Yeah, well, just right behind us we have, that's what we do. We grow probably, 70 different kinds of vegetables, and, we really go for, we like to grow things that are unusual, heirloom varieties, forgotten varieties, things that taste better but look funny. And that's part of what our customers value, because they're always learning something about new foods that they can eat, and they're eating better as a result.
Let me ask you the question of how so many farmers ended up hooked on synthetic fertilizers and these pesticides and veering away from what used to be, for millennia, organic farming.
Right. Well, as an environmental historian, you probably know more details than I do, but I think it's pretty clear that after World War II, when all these petrochemicals were invented as part of the war effort, then there was a lot of research afterwards to how to continue their market, for all those companies that were producing them. And when they started to find, oh, well, maybe we can use these on farms, Roundup, which is an herbicide, is something that I think has been linked to some of the defoliants used in perhaps the Vietnam War. And, that's something that's used on almost every farm on the country, every conventional farm today, in huge quantities. So it's pretty scary stuff if you really, look into it. And so it's really, I think, starting in the 50s and from there on, where more and more chemicals started to be used. And as a result, most of our tractors and our machinery, we actually predate that change, because the way we farm is the way everybody used to farm before those chemicals were introduced. And the machinery that is very useful to us was created for that time before chemicals, and it's still extremely useful, but old.
Can organic farms feed the world?
Oh, definitely. I think they're coming up with more and more evidence that that you can produce as much or more organically. Besides the fact that, I think the main thing is that when you farm organically, you're farming with attention to the natural cycles of the earth and the environment. So you're farming in a way that's sustainable, which means you can keep producing that food essentially forever, as opposed to, if a conventional monocrop that's really teetering on the edge of a collapse, whether it's from pests or disease or drought or whatever, eventually you're going to hit that disaster and there's not going to be any food. And then that land is going to have to convert to something else that's not going to produce food at all. So instead of being on this teeter-totter, you have something that's more intensive, uses more manpower, but is much more sustainable in the long run in producing food.
And the food, as you see it, is healthier?
Well, we definitely know, since we don't use petroleum-based fertilizers, that's not allowed in organic, we just use natural fertilizers, which are much, much lower intensity. So they don't give the plant that huge burst of growth that like a pure nitrogen, like ammonium nitrate would, which is what a lot of conventional farmers use. So the plant grows slower. And as it's growing, so a lot of people feel that the plant's growing slower, it's in the ground longer, it's concentrating more nutrients, and as a result, a lot of people feel it tastes better, and some studies are finding that there are actually more nutrients in the plant.
Now, what about the issue of not using these synthetic pesticides? It must be as you, Chris, a hell of a lot of labor to deal with the pests, to deal with weeds and so forth.
There's we do have pests. You can see some damage with right here cabbage loopers that feed on, but there are organic alternatives to that. We tend to basically scout, keep an eye. You can live with a certain amount of damage as long as it's not affecting the part that's going to be marketed. So example, with kales, we'll use a bacterial spray that's approved that basically just makes the worms sick and die, but it doesn't affect humans. It's kind of like if you had a virus for a cat or a dog, it affects them, like parvo for dogs, but it doesn't affect humans. So there's a lot of research that's gone into what makes insects healthy and what makes them sick, and how to introduce something that would keep their populations in check without, using a broad spectrum killer that'll kill all the insects, in the field. And we also do a lot of diversity. So like you mentioned, monocropping is one of the worst ways to grow, because you're creating a perfect world for insects that are going to thrive on that, and you're basically tilling every piece of land, so there's not a lot of buffers. So we try to grow buffers. We just introduced actually into this patch here 1 million ladybugs, and I actually was a little skeptical, but I've found areas where we had tremendous aphid problems, and they've really taken them down. I'm actually really pleased with that. So we're using more beneficial insects for corn. There's a wasp that parasitizes some of the worms that will get into corn ears and knock them off before they can cause any damage, and we use those. Just good crop rotation. The floating row covers are another thing to keep the bugs off the crops we use in the spring. So there's a lot of things that we can do to grow, so that we don't have to spray. Because if you do grow certain crops at certain times of the year, and you're going to be selling them, there are times when we can't grow certain crops, like a lot of the brassicas and arugula in the summer. Flea beetles eat them up, and we don't have an organic solution for that, so we either grow them under row cover or just don't grow them at that time of the year, and our customers are fine with that.
Well, we're at the Garden of Eve in Riverhead, and it's hard to avoid the comparison to indeed a Garden of Eden. This is an idyllic, wonderful place that you've created. Thank you. Brian Holweil is a researcher for the World Watch Institute and a resident of Sag Harbor, where he began the farmers market here, which sells organic produce.
It does. We started the farmers market about 4 years ago, and like many farmers markets around the country, it doesn't only sell local produce, but there tends to be a lot of organic produce here too, and there's quite a bit of overlap in people's interest in buying something that's raised nearby to support local farmers, but also buying something that's produced organically.
Now, you've written many articles and you've written books about agriculture and organic farming. Is organic farming a practical enough form of agriculture to feed the world?
Well, there's no question. Maybe 30 or 40 years ago, when people first got interested in raising crops and livestock without pesticides, without chemical fertilizers, without antibiotics and hormones, there were questions about whether this could be done on a large scale. We were so dependent on chemicals, and our research, our agricultural universities, our government support was so dependent on chemicals that we needed to relearn how to raise crops and animals organically. Now, with several decades of experience and millions of farmers around this country and around the world practicing organic agriculture on a relatively large scale, it's now a myth that this can't be done, and it's also a myth that this can't feed the world.
What's the advantage?
The advantage from the farmer's perspective is the opportunity to lower a lot of their costs. Chemical fertilizers, pesticides cost money. And once a farmer makes the shift to organic production, once they begin to improve the quality of their soil, once they begin to bring back all of the insects and other beneficial organisms that are going to reduce the pest problems on their farm, then they no longer need those chemical inputs. And so it does take a few years to make the transition to organic farming, to get the sort of the biological capacity of the farm up to speed. But once that's the case, pest problems go down, the fertility of the soil is increased, and the expenses to the farmer are reduced. And the real advantage for farmers all around the world, particularly in poorer countries, where most of the world's hunger and poverty are concentrated, is that organic farming is likely the best hope to help these farmers make a good income and feed themselves, because a lot of farmers in Africa and Latin America and Asia have been completely bypassed by chemical farming. It wasn't appropriate for them, and they couldn't afford those chemical inputs that it depended on.
What do you say to people who claim that there's nothing nutritionally different between food grown with chemicals and food grown organically?
There's actually quite a bit of evidence now that organically raised crops are more nutritious in a number of different ways. There's good evidence that they contain about 30 to 40% higher levels of phytochemicals. These are antioxidants and isoflavones and carotenoids, and all those chemicals we're just beginning to understand from plants that have incredible health benefits for us. They're anti-cancer, anti-aging, antibacterial. And there's also good evidence that organic crops are also more nutritious in terms of the amount of nutrients, iron, zinc, phosphorus, sodium, calcium, compared to non-organic crops. And that advantage is between 10 and 30%. And the explanation, scientists are still trying to understand why it is that organic crops, from broccoli to sweet corn to wheat, wherever they're tested around the world, have a higher nutrient level than non-organic crops. But the best explanation we have sort of has two parts. One, we've bred crops in the last few decades primarily for higher yields. That was the major goal that crop breeders and farmers were going for. As we bred wheat and corn and broccoli to produce bigger heads of broccoli and bigger heads of wheat and corn, we inadvertently bred away from other things the plant was doing. A plant only has so much energy to devote to all the different things it does. And as we bred for higher yield, the plant's ability to take up nutrients from the soil was reduced. The plant's ability to ward off disease was reduced, and all other sorts of traits were unintentionally reduced. The other explanation for this organic advantage has to do with how organic farmers nurture their crops. It turns out that when you apply chemical fertilizer to a plant, it's not as effective a way for a plant to absorb those minerals as putting down compost or manure or a more balanced form of fertilizer. chemical fertilizers tend to focus on just a few nutrients, whereas organic forms of fertilizer, like compost or manure or cover crops that are decomposing in the soil, have the full suite of nutrients. And it turns out that because the organic forms of fertilizer are bound up in humus in the soil, in organic matter, they actually interact with the roots of the plants in a way that helps the roots absorb more nutrients effectively. So part of the issue is that the reason that organic crops tend to have higher nutrient levels is because the fertilization techniques and the pest control techniques used by organic farmers encourage more nutrient uptake, whereas chemical use, pesticide use, we know disrupts a plant's ability to absorb and synthesize nutrients.
Now, you've not only written at length about the benefits of organic agriculture, but you've also written at length about the importance of growing locally and buying your food from locally produced farmers.
Well, there is a close connection between those two. You go to a farmer's market and everything there is going to be local. That's the definition of a farmer's market. It's food from the area, and you're buying that local food because you know that it's going to be fresher. It hasn't traveled as long. It hasn't been in storage. You have an opportunity to keep money in your local economy, to meet your neighbors. There's a great social interaction that happens at a farmer's market. You can help prevent sprawl because you're supporting farmland in your area, and from an environmental perspective, you're helping to save a lot of oil, which is no small thing nowadays. We use a tremendous amount of petroleum shipping food around this country and around the world. Now, not every farmer at this farmer's market is organic. But if you look at farmers markets around the country, organic farmers are very well represented, and that's because organic farming isn't just about how you grow the crops. It's about a whole alternative to the mainstream food system. That's what the founders of organic farming in America had in mind. The idea that they wanted the farmer to connect with the consumer, that they didn't want to use mass marketing channels. They wanted to use smaller companies to market and distribute their food. And it's the reason why, even though we only have a few % of the farms in this country as organic, at any given farmer's market, maybe a third or half of the farmers are organic, because many of the organic farmers in this country tend to be smaller. They know that their customers are interested in high-quality, fresh products, so they want to market it directly through farmers markets. And there's a sort of solidarity between the organic food movement and the local food movement, in the sense, again, that both are supporting an alternative to the more conventional food system, which tends to be long distance, food that's grown on very large farms and shipped long distances, which separates you and me, the eaters, from the farmer psychologically and geographically.
Betty, you and Dale farm organically, strictly. Why?
That's a big question. Dale grew up in Iowa from many generations of farm families, and he saw the results of the use of chemicals directly. His mother died of liver cancer, and he connected it with the use of chemicals in the area. And he grew up seeing the chemicals brought in. When he was a young child, they didn't use them so much. It was the extension services that told them to use these chemicals. And he innately didn't feel good about it. And in the 1970s, when he started farming on his own, he decided not to use any chemicals. And he was like a pioneer in organic farming in the 70s for that reason.
Now, you farm here in Sag Harbor, which is not exactly Iowa.
Right.
Is this a practical place to have a farm?
Well, Dale's also a pioneer in small-scale intensive farming. It's a very good place to have a farm. The climate is good, and we're farming in basically an acre and a little more in Sag Harbor. But it's so intensively planted, we can feed a huge amount of people on that little piece of land. And we drive around here and we see these big estates with lawns. We don't see lawns. We picture vegetables there, and we think one day people can turn their lawns into beautiful, productive organic gardens. So small space is wonderful for farming.
When people come here at the farmers market here in Sag Harbor every week when it's open, when people come and buy your produce, do they appreciate, do you think, that, hey, this is organic and it was grown in a very nurturant way and all, or is it just food on a counter?
I'd say the majority of our customers are local people who know us and do very much appreciate what we're doing, and they always thank us for being here, and they are looking for a place to buy wholesome organic produce, and they specifically come for that. So I do think they do appreciate it. Then there's people who are tourists who really, this year we've seen a lot of people who are used to their own home farmers markets, like in Union Square and in other places, and they say, farmers market, great, I can have one here as well. So they also appreciate it.
Dale, you grew up in a farm family in Iowa.
Yes.
And you've kind of turned from the family tradition of using chemicals and synthetic fertilizer. Why?
Because I felt it was really hard on the environment, and a poison is a poison. You know, it never ceased being a poison. When you put poison on the land and on the plants to protect them from insects or to kill the insects or to kill weeds and so forth, a lot of that poison goes off into the water and goes into the groundwater. And like over 75% of the wells and all the farms in Iowa are polluted with some kind of a farm chemical or another that's been used over the last 40 years. And in addition, I went to college and studied microbiology and worked in research and laboratories, and I saw that a lot of the same chemicals we use to cause cancer in animals to experiment on the different kinds of cancers were the same things that were used in some of these chemicals that we were using to spray on the crops to kill insects and so forth. So I just kind of, felt that there was, a real disconnect here, that we would have to start using something else, or we're going to pollute the whole entire planet and with all these millions and millions, and actually it's billions of tons of chemicals that are put on agriculture crops every year. So that, I just feel it's a quick fix and it couldn't last forever. So I felt that I wanted to grow crops that and use the land in a way so that future generations, 5, 10 generations down the road, could still use that land and safely live there and drink the water, breathe the air, and grow healthy crops there. So
when you go back to Iowa and talk to your family or relatives out there about the way you grow food and how they still grow food, what's the nature of those conversations?
Well, they're actually very, very happy that I've been innovative and found a new way to do things. Most of my relatives and farm families, they all farmed, but they are mostly all retired now. My brother still farms. A small amount of land, but and he uses some chemicals, but a minimum of chemicals, and he uses raises cattle and pastures them, and he just feels that that I'm doing the right thing, and he wishes he could get away from it with a large investment in all the machinery and the tillage equipment and so forth, and the land itself. He has to maximize his production. So in the years where you transition from conventional agriculture, where you're using chemicals, to when you're not using any chemicals and you're using all organic matter and compost and so forth, and natural ways of controlling insects, there's a 3 or 4 year period where you wouldn't break even. You probably would lose money, and he just can't afford to switch over. And that's where most farmers are kind of stuck, in that they're heavily invested in the conventional agriculture. And of course the universities are pretty much teaching that you have to use so many pounds of different chemical fertilizers, and so much of this kind of herbicide control for the weeds, and so much of this for different kinds of insects you might have in the corn or soybeans or whatever crop you're growing. Basically in Iowa it's corn and soybeans. So it's very tenuous situation for farmers who are barely making it anyway, to try to switch to organic. But if you do it on a small scale, and that's what I did. I experimented with growing organic produce, started with a half acre in 1978, and by 1986 I had 15 acres. But that was too much. I couldn't coordinate it all. I grew 300 tons of produce that year, but I didn't make any more money than I did the year before. So in 1987 and 1988 in Iowa, was my last 2 years I farmed there. I farmed 7.5 acres and then dropped to 5 acres the last year, and I still did very well as I did when I had 15 acres. And then I moved, researched the area out here, looked at the demand for organic produce in this Hamptons area, and found that there seems to be not enough organic farmers for the demand. So I decided to pull up from Iowa and take a couple years to write down everything I had learned from my experience in Iowa, and move here. And I started with an acre of land here, started building up the soil, bringing in compost, and preparing that land for growing organic produce. And in 1990, I started growing again. And that's where I met Lindley at Provisions, and that was one of the first places I started selling the produce.
Now, you can make a living, you and Betty, from just a little over an acre?
Yes, we can. Yes, but it's very intensive. If you would come to our farm, you would see that we grow one crop after another. We add compost, and we do use a small amount of chicken manure fertilizer that's been dried, and it's composted, so it's all very safe. It's been pasteurized, actually, so it doesn't have any E. coli or anything like that in it. So it's and we use that as a side dressing, just kind of to boost the crops when we first get them started, so that they outgrow the insects and the diseases that might invade them if they were kind of stunted from lack of nutrients that they could get from the soil.
Now, there have been reports that the whole world could be fed through organic agriculture. You think this is an exaggeration, or you think it's for real?
No, I think it's definitely for real. I go back to research that was done in the 1970s when I think the Department of Agriculture was saying, "Oh, you can't go organic because we need to plant fence row to fence row to feed the whole world." And at that time, China, which was basically organic back in the 60s, 70s, and they were just starting to use chemicals. They were growing more food or more calories than we were per acre. Our input was like 14 calories of energy for every calorie of food that we got back out. Theirs was the other way around. They were getting 5 calories of food out of every calorie of energy they put into their agricultural production. And they were feeding 1.1 billion then people on only 11% of the arable land that was in agriculture that the United States was. And although we were exporting and we were feeding this country and we were exporting a lot of food, they were still producing more food, and they were basically organic. So I think that it doesn't, definitely the going organic is the way to go agriculturally. And also we need to have more people back on the land. We put ourselves in a predicament where we don't have a base of agriculture. We have an upside-down pyramid where we have all these people up here supported by this little small number of people way at the bottom. And food is the basis of our survival. If we have so few people growing the food, if anything happens to that population, and even with the energy, like if they couldn't get the fuel and so forth in conventional agriculture, they need all that fuel. So who's going to get it? Are we going to, if there's a shortage, is it going to be the people that are driving to work? Is it going to be the people that are growing the food? Or is it going to be the truckers that are bringing the food from one place to another? I think there's going to be lots of problems someday with this predicament we're in with so few people on the land actually growing the food for all the rest of the people that are dependent on it.
Lindley Whelan, you come to the farmer's market to buy organic produce. Why don't you just go to some supermarket and buy your food?
Well, one, I love to support Dale and Betty and other local farmers. That's such a nice thing to do because they do such a great job. And two, they don't spray. I know where it comes from, and it's absolutely delicious. It's so good. So I can't fail by buying my stuff here.
What's your concern about people who spray chemical pesticides on food or use synthetic fertilizer? I mean, what bothers you about that?
Well, I'm not sure how it all ends, but I'm sure it doesn't sound good getting all those chemicals. I don't really know specifically how bad that stuff is for us, but I know this is not, this is good for me, and I'd rather be safe than sorry. I'm and the food tastes better. I can't really reiterate that enough. It tastes so good. I'm so into like all the vegetables, and the garlic, and and the greens, and it's just really beautiful colors, and it's delicious. And what more could you ask for if you like your vegetables?